Good morning, everyone. I think this is the earliest we've ever done a DeProgram. John Kiriakou is right over there to the right side of your screen. I'm Ted Rall to the left side of the screen. That doesn't reflect anything ideological. Thanks for joining us. It's Saturday, May 31st, and we're really happy you're here with us. I don't know. I think we might have the entire world of political commentary all to ourselves this morning, John.
Yeah, it seems that way.
It's, there's no morning talkies on TV. There's not much live stuff on the radio. So, who knows? Maybe there's riches and niches, or maybe not. but for those of you who are here, we do appreciate you. So today we're going to be talking about the latest reversal in the Trump administration's policy. This one about the steel industry, specifically the Nippon Steel-US Steel takeover. That speaks near and dear to me, and I think to John too.
Oh, yes.
So we have some past dealings with that, and we'll talk about that, and also just the steel tariffs in general. So if you're in the Rust Belt in particular, like where I grew up, you are.
And me. I grew up there too.
Yeah. So two boys of the Rust Belt. And also the latest in immigration and deportation. Supreme Court ruling has stripped protections away from about over 500,000 people who are now going to be subject to deportation as a result. The latest on the U.S.-Iran nuke talks, which, man, that's a strange story. And I'm looking forward to talking about Sean P. Diddy Puffy Combs and his trial. Which I think brings up a lot of interesting topics that maybe have been lost in all the sort of extremely salacious details that have come out of that sordid mess of this fallen rap mogul. So, John, let's get into it with this with the steel tariffs.
Yeah.
So the Trump administration always keeps bouncing back and forth on tariffs. The latest is that the administration is imposing 50% tariffs on foreign steel. As you and I both know, the steel industry basically had been on the ropes through the 1970s, but then in the 1980s, the big challenge came in the form of Japanese competition. The Japanese notoriously dumped their steel on the U.S. market, and what that means is they sold it for less than the price that they needed to make a profit. They took a long-term loss. It was basically an investment, and now that's not even considered a controversial way to get market share. That's what tech does all the time.
Yeah, lost leaders.
But at the time, it was considered sleazy and unethical and maybe illegal. It really caused a lot of trade tensions and political tensions between the U.S. and Japan. In the end, the Japanese won. The U.S. steel industry, as we knew it in places like Ohio and Pennsylvania, pretty much collapsed. There's all these gutted factories where you and I grew up, and U.S. Steel, the big mama of them all, which you can see from the interstate when you drive through Allentown or Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. You'll see it from the highway. This just goes on and on and on. You're driving 70 miles an hour, but there's there's more and more, but it's all just rusted out. And anyway, so the Biden administration had approved, I wouldn't say that they really midwifed, but they had approved the acquisition of U.S. Steel by Nippon Steel.
Before changing their minds, though, and declaring it a national security necessity.
Right. Now, the thing is that, this is, you can really, on the one hand, it really did feel like injurious to people who lived through that period like we did. It's like, oh, well, the Japanese, they kind of broke the rules and then they won, and this is like it, and now they get to collect all the pieces. Trump ran against this deal in the campaign. But on the other hand, it's also true that, they need the investment. This is billions of dollars that will be coming in from $14 billion by some counts. They need the new technology. They need to rehab these facilities. Otherwise, they might go under anyway, just for being obsolete technologically. So, I think it's kind of like it is what it is. And maybe the Trump administration is just being told like this by the experts, this is what needs to happen. And please please sign off on it. But it is a startling reversal for Mr. Make America Great Again.
I'll tell you, there were several things that really shocked me yesterday about this this whole issue. First of all, Donald Trump went to West Mifflin, Pennsylvania, which is a close-in suburb of Pittsburgh. It's a steel suburb. U.S. Steel has major works there. He gave a speech at one of the U.S. Steel facilities in which he said several things that were just incredible to me. Number one, he announced that the deal is going forward, but he never called it a takeover or an acquisition. He called it a partnership.
Right.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it, but okay, I'm willing to cut some slack. Then he made several announcements. This just made me say, wow. First of all, the deal includes this: a promise that Nippon Steel will not close any of the plants for at least 10 years. Any of them. If a plant is open today, it's going to be open for the next 10 years. Fascinating. Number two, he announced, as you said, 50% tariffs on all imported steel. So he said something that was kind of funny. He said at 25%, they can still get over the fence. At 50%, they can't get over the fence. So as of today, 50% tariff on all imported steel. If you want to buy steel, you want to build a bridge or build a building or whatever, it's going to be American steel. And third, he announced that Nippon Steel will give every employee of U.S. Steel $5,000. $5,000. Everybody gets a car. Everybody gets Dr. Phil's wife's line of makeup. Everybody, $5,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was watching the Pittsburgh news online, WTAE Channel 4, and literally everybody in the mill was chanting, you know, Donald Trump, Donald Trump. It's incredible to me. On the one hand, philosophically, free trade is a great thing, right? Because it evens the playing field. It helps to improve economies overseas. That way, people don't want to emigrate to the United States. They have jobs in their home countries. And over the long term, free trade is supposed to help everybody. On the other hand, this is exactly what a president should be doing. I mean, why didn't any other president do this? They didn't care. Ted,
they didn't care. And you know, it's like, and when there's been like not classified, but secret memos that have come out from even going back to the Reagan years, that deindustrialization was a bipartisan, intentional policy of the U.S. government, which kind of still, when I say that, makes me sound conspiratorial and insane, but it's true.
It's true because they wanted to transition into a service economy, and then they got it, and it wasn't so great for a lot of the northern tier states.
No,
you know,
and I don't know why they thought it was not going to suck. I mean, service jobs never paid well at the time.
No,
Congress
hasn't raised the minimum wage.
The only advantage I can think of, and this wasn't the case that they made, was that it was going to reduce pollution in the United States. I mean, and I don't think they ever gave that any thought. Mm-hmm. I mean, they were just like, we're going to get rid of these factories. Why? Just because they're old, or because it's, you know, I don't get it, because this was a serious engine of economic and political growth. I mean, it was one way to stick it to the unions, I guess.
Sure.
But basically it was.
But that's a thing. I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is Donald Trump embracing the unions,
mm-hmm.
with the unions cheering him on, and it's almost like he's completing this transition that Ronald Reagan began with an America First economic policy that unions want to see. Every union member wants to see his job guaranteed for the next 10 years. What union member wouldn't want a $5,000 bonus? Who wouldn't want their decrepit old rust bucket town to be revitalized and rejuvenated Just like you and I have had this conversation before, but you grew up in Dayton, Ohio. I grew up in Newcastle, Pennsylvania. Mesta Steel and Johnson Bronze and the Tin Works have been closed since the 70s in my hometown. Since the 70s. When I was a little kid, my grandmother used to sweep the porch 3 times a day because of the soot and ash that would cover it.
There's that pollution.
From the U.S. Steelworks that was 6 blocks away where my grandfather worked for 30 years. Pollution was a problem, but everybody was working. When I was 10 years old, my grandfather walked me to a neighbor who was a stockbroker back in the days when you needed a stockbroker to buy stocks. Right. I was 11 years old, and the first $300 I made from my paper route, I bought 10 shares of U.S. Steel, just in time for it to go right down the toilet. And I think I sold it for like $56 or something, 10 years later, because everything had closed. But my grandfather said to me when he was recommending U.S. Steel, he said, look around you. Everything is made of steel, everything. Well, Japanese steel. Yeah. Because the Japanese were dumping meaning selling at under their own cost. And they did it to break the back of the American steel industry, at which they were successful. And now here we are 50 years later, Ted, 50 years later, and a president's finally doing something about it.
Trying to clean up the mess, and John, I'm really glad that you brought up this 10-year job guarantee. I had a front row seat. I was a banker. I worked at the Industrial Bank of Japan Trust Company from 1986 to 1990, and here in New York. And the thing is, for people who aren't aware of it, like in Japan, bankers aren't just the people who keep your money. If bankers have a relationship with their company clients that goes far beyond that. They're basically consultants. They hold their hands. They negotiate with government, local government, international government. So if a company wanted to open a plant, like let's say, I had Honda of Ohio as a client, I had Toyota as a client in Kentucky, and in Nissan in Tennessee, in Smyrna, and basically they would say, so Ted, Nissan wants to open this company. I did this in Smyrna. Please call up the local authorities and find out what they'll do for us. And so they had these industrial development boards at the time all over the country. And so I'd call up the local industrial development board and I'd say, okay, so we're going to bring X number of jobs. We're going to, can you bring the freeway to the plant?
Oh, sure.
Can you bring us a railroad spur to the plant? Can you say, give us a tax break, maybe zero taxes for 5 or 10 years. Those were all standard asks. And for the most part, these, all these places were desperate for jobs. These were rural places. They're like, sure. But it always struck me that, I remember when I first started and I talked to my boss, I said, well, what's to prevent a company from coming in, getting the local authorities to spend millions of dollars that they may or may not have, the taxpayers may or may not be able to afford, and then just packing up 5 years later or 8 years later and saying, it didn't work out, yank all the jobs, and they never paid any taxes. They just cost all this money.
Good question.
Or maybe there's not many jobs guaranteed. Maybe it's like, we'll hire 20 Americans for the crappy jobs, but we're going to bring in everyone else from Japan, right? What's to prevent? They never asked for any guarantees. They never insisted we're not going to do that, because they were scared that if they didn't give us the right answer, I would pick up the phone and call another county and they'd get the factory. So it was bleak. And I can tell you, it was vulture capitalism. I'd sit there and go through my Lotus 1, 2, 3 spreadsheet, and I'd literally work my way in order of the highest unemployment rates in each state as they were released. This place has 33% unemployment. They'll do whatever we want. They're gonna be total whores, right? They're gonna roll. But of course, obviously, I didn't like it, but it was my job. and I was pretty good at it. It's like, and so now I look back, I'm like, well, Donald Trump, he wouldn't have done that, and he can put the political pressure like he did, on the Carrier air conditioning factory. It's like, I'll fuck you on social media. I'll make you look bad. I'll make your life miserable. And I'm the president of the United States, right? So there's a lot of things I can do. This is great. I mean, it's like, I don't know if it's too late.
I can't believe it.
But it's better late than never. And it's like, and look, the big thing that we keep and also this is, we talked about the reversal of the polar reversal of the Democrats and Republicans on foreign policy. Here we're seeing it on domestic policy. Democrats gave up on unions. They gave up on these dirty jobs. Now they're coastal elites. But I mean, these were the jobs that allowed people. When I was a kid, I knew dudes who made $100,000 a year, which was a lot of money in Dayton, Ohio, with all their overtime, and they sent their kids to Yale. And these are guys who may not have even had a high school degree. They might have had a GED, but it's like, they weren't stupid. They just, they were working class, and like those jobs, that was the engine of upward mobility in much of the country, and both parties just shivved it. Yeah. And I always say Donald Trump, his genius was that he would look out the same limousine window as Hillary Clinton, but he saw something she didn't when he was driven to Dayton, where he campaigned extensively in 2016, and other places, Pennsylvania and so on. And he's like, look out the window and all the boarded up houses, the closed up factories, the big, beautiful closed up factories, as he called them. And he thought, man, it must suck to live here. And it must really suck. And I bet if I just say that to people, they're going to feel seen. That's why he's president.
I'm going to steal that. I think that is so 100% right on. That's exactly what has happened. Yeah. Donald Trump, as crazy as it might sound, Donald Trump gets it. And the Democrats don't get it.
And it's weird because Hillary Clinton is from Illinois and spent considerable time in Little Rock, Arkansas, which is a pit.
Yeah, it's awful. I've only been there once. It's just awful.
It's third world.
My apologies to any of our viewers who might be in Little Rock, Arkansas, but I'm sorry. It's just not a nice place.
No, it's not a nice place. And I'm not talking about the people, but
no, lovely people.
They're in a bad situation there.
Yeah.
But but she spent time in those places, Mr. Lord Fauntleroy, our current president, lived in the lap of privilege his entire life.
Yes.
And even so, well, it's like FDR. FDR was privileged, but he could see it. I don't think that's something that can be taught. You either have empathy or you don't. Yes. And I'm not sure. And like, so this is, I don't know if, do you think that this can save the steel industry? And two-part question, John, do you think the Democrats, when they come back to power, they'll continue these policies because they'll see the success of them? Or do you think, they'll just like drop this like a bored kid dropping a toy on the ground?
I think the Democrats will recognize the value of this policy, but they've become so elitist that I think in the end they'll negotiate the whole thing away. They'll say, "Oh, well, the Democratic Party today, we're the party of free trade and free enterprise, and everybody should have a level playing field, and tariffs are bad for the economy," even though exactly the opposite is true in this case.
Yeah, clearly.
I'll tell you what.
Targeted tariffs are a good idea.
They are a good idea.
You're trying to protect essential American businesses. I've always been pro them. I was not in favor of the sweeping across the board tariffs that were initially announced on almost every country. But that didn't make any sense. This is what the doctor ordered, I think.
You bet, man. I couldn't agree more.